So right now we're going to look at the social development in infancy and childhood section of your notes. So starting with stranger anxiety. Stranger anxiety is the fear of strangers that infants commonly display beginning about 8 months of age. I know if you look at this picture of poor Tessa on Santa's lap over here, it's not an uncommon picture for you to see of people between certain ages. Little kids between certain ages get very distressed when they are passed off to somebody else to hold. Now, in this particular scenario, Tessa was looking forward to seeing Santa very much, but that doesn't mean that she wants Santa to hold her. That was an entirely different story. Now, there are a few reasons why this happens. One is object permanence, which we discussed with Piaget, that idea that something continues to exist even when it's out of sight. And so whether or not the child at this point can see their parent, they know that they're missing their parent now. They know that their parent or caregiver still exists, and they know that this person here is not their parent or caregiver. And so they get extremely distressed. It also ties in with the Piaget concept of schemas, where they have categories for faces that they have seen before. This is somebody that I know, this is somebody that takes care of me, somebody I'm comfortable with. This person is not, they are a stranger. And so when they've developed these schemas for people that they know, and they can't assimilate a new face into that schema, they become very distressed. And this also ties into the concept of habituation. So remember that concept of habituation where a child will stare at novel stimuli longer than things that they're familiar with. So again, that scenario where you're standing in that grocery line and that child has taken an enormous interest in you, where the parent often says, "Oh my God, they're flirting with you." And actually, it's just that they haven't seen you before. They recognize you as a stranger, not as somebody that's familiar. So if you try to hold them, as in the case of Santa Claus, the child will become extremely distressed because this is not a person that they know. One important thing to consider is attachment. So attachment is that long-lasting emotional tie with another person. Attachment is actually necessary for survival, and it aids in human development. That touch, that physical contact will actually help kids to develop socially. It'll help for good neural connections, that sort of thing. Often the initial attachments are usually formed with the mother, but it can be just as strong with a father or another caregiver. And young children show that they feel attached to others by seeking that closeness and that connection with the caregiver. So when a child is out somewhere new and their parent or caregiver is there, they'll often climb on their lap when they're distressed or upset, or if something is new, they hold on to the parent before they explore the environment. That's all normal stuff. And if the parent or caregiver is not there, they get extremely distressed. Now, there were examples in World War II where babies who were orphaned in hospitals, who were being fed and changed but were not being held and did not have close attachments with anybody, would die for no apparent reason. People viewed being fed and being changed as their only biological needs, but that need for attachment was just as strong, and many of the babies were not able to survive in the absence of it. They found a big difference when nurses would hold the children. Babies that were held were able to gain weight and reach developmental milestones. One of the people who studied attachment was Harry Harlow. Zimmerman actually also participated in many of these studies. Harry Harlow called this form of attachment, he called it love. But as we find love a hard thing to define and not something that we all agree upon because of the need for operational definitions, we will look at his study as an attachment study. And so what he did was he took these rhesus monkeys when they were born, he separated them from their mother so that they were grown up without their mother. But instead they would be put in different types of environments. So they could be raised with, say, a cloth mother, which is these cloth sort of pole thing with a head on top. The cloth mother had that soft touch and the monkey could cuddle up to it and relax on it, that sort of thing. And then there was the wire mesh mother, And in many of the scenarios, the wire mesh mother was the mother that had the bottle with the nipple and the milk where the monkey could feed. And the cloth mother only offered that soft touch. Now remember, these were not actual animals, they were inanimate. Now the thinking of the time was that the animals would form the attachment with the source of the food, not the source of the comfort, if the source of the food and the source of the comfort were two different things. And it turned out that the animals actually, these rhesus monkeys were attached to the cloth, the soft touch of the cloth mother, not the wire mesh mother that provided the milk. When the monkeys that were raised with a cloth mother were presented with new items that they might have found frightening because these items were unfamiliar, they would run to the cloth mother for comfort before starting to explore their environment and see what was there. If a monkey that was raised with a cloth mother and was presented with new items without the presence of their cloth mother, they would often cower in the corner and not explore their environment. If a monkey hadn't been raised with a cloth mother at all, then the presence of a cloth mother would actually offer no comfort to the monkey when presented with new items. And if you think of this in terms of your own anecdotal experience, you probably notice that if you have a pet at home, a cat, a dog, whatever, that the dog or cat often prefers the person who pets it the most and plays with it the most. Now, that can also be the same as the person that feeds it, but that close attachment is with that one that cuddles. I'm not sure if you've heard that old expression that familiarity breeds contempt. But I think the notion is that if you're too familiar with something, say a sibling or what have you, that they get annoying and you're bothered by them and you're more likely to not like them or to hate something because it's too familiar. But research actually suggests the opposite. One of the things that infants are almost immediately comforted by is some form of routine. First, the familiarity is going to be with the scent and the sound of the mother, and in the case of, say, adoption or whatever, that female voice, that main caregiver, they can be flexible to that. And then it will very rapidly go to that sort of routine. They know that, say, after they are played with for a little bit, then they are going to eat. And after they eat, they will have their bath. And after they have their bath, they will have a book read to them. And after their book is finished, they will go to sleep. And this routine actually helps to make them feel comfortable. So if you were to picture yourself being in another country, one that you are not familiar with at all, one where you don't speak the language, and the food and other customs are quite different than the ones that you are familiar with, and suddenly, as you're walking down a block somewhere, you run into a McDonald's. Even if a McDonald's is not the type of food that you'd want to eat while you're here, being in this other country where everything is unusual to you, you're not used to anything, that McDonald's might be great comfort to you. You might hear somebody somewhere speaking English or, coming from the same place that you come from. And you might all of a sudden have an interest in talking to them, whereas you wouldn't have otherwise. And to that end, routines and things that are familiar to us, it doesn't breed contempt at all. It actually breeds good mental health. And I think that one of the things we could all be struggling with a little bit right now is the big, sharp change in our routine as a result of schools being closed and having to switch to distance learning. School, whether you like it or not, imposes a routine on your day that even if you're not happy to get up in the morning because you're not getting enough sleep and you don't want to go to that first period class or you don't feel ready or you have a lot of work to do or whatever, that routine that's imposed upon you that doesn't move for you, it actually helps for you to get stuff done. It helps you to maintain good habits, and it does breed good mental health. And so now, while we are all home because the schools are closed, we have to figure out a way to put that routine in for ourselves because the school isn't able to do it for us. And if you like, you let me know and I will give you some tips on how to do that. But when we're talking about familiarity and attachment for really little kids, babies and children, we're talking about, yes, routines, and a critical period where they form these attachments, but it's not this precise critical period like it would be for other animals or like it was for the rhesus monkeys. It's not precise like that. There can be flexibility, but that forming attachments and that having the things in your environment that are familiar to you, it is crucial. Now, to remind you about Konrad Lorenz and his imprinting studies with ducklings, where he discovered that ducklings, when they're born, the first moving thing, well, really, it's typically the mother is the first thing the duckling will see. They will imprint on the mother. And what this essentially means is that they instinctively know this is their mother, and this mother will teach me everything I need to do in order to survive in the world. Konrad Lorenz discovered that if you put someone else in the place of the mother, that need to attach and imprint on somebody so that you can learn what you need to do to survive has to happen anyway. And so in the absence of the mother being there, but Konrad Lorenz being there instead, the ducklings would imprint to Konrad Lorenz, and it became imperative that he do all the things that need to be done for ducklings so that they learn how to survive in the wild. The good news is humans do not imprint. Because ducklings who don't have that opportunity to imprint are kind of lost in terms of knowing what to do and how to survive on their own. Humans, again, don't have that precise critical period. The need for attachment and things being familiar is essential, but there's flexibility with that, where with these little ducklings, they don't have that flexibility. So no, humans do not imprint. Babies who are adopted days, weeks, months, etc. after birth can become attached to his or her new and responsive caregivers. They just need a responsive environment, one where a caregiver is attending to their needs, where they feel like, when they're upset or they need something, that there is somebody in their environment that cares about that. And babies become attached to what they've known. And if you're around little kids, you notice sometimes they want to watch the same movie over and over and over again, or they want to have the same book read to them over and over, despite the fact that they know how it ends. I can tell you with my own kids, there are some stories, just like little stories of things that happened when they were born. There's this sort of funny story where Jack, when he was a newborn, we were at my in-laws' house, and I was changing Jack on the table at my in-laws' house, and as I took off the one diaper, he started to poop while I was changing his diaper. And I didn't know that projectile poop was a thing, but apparently it is. And he started spraying poop out and was hitting the opposite wall from where I was standing. And I kind of panicked and didn't know what to do. And as I'm trying to quickly block that situation, all of a sudden an RKP just goes in the other direction and hits the other wall. And the whole time, I want to tell you, my mom and my husband were there watching this entire thing, and neither one got up to help me. They just laughed. And if I'm going to be honest, I would have done the same thing. So Jack likes to hear that story. He thinks it's hysterically funny, but the number of times I've told it to him, he knows what's happening. He knows how it goes. There aren't any new details added, but it's fun for him to hear those stories. It's something that's familiar. It's something that he knows, and that feels good. And kids know rather instinctively to seek that out. Before I talk about Mary Ainsworth and her strange situation test, I should mention the person that she was working with. So John Bowlby was also a developmental psychologist. He was also a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, but his work was mostly with child development. He had this theory of attachment that suggested that a child would initially form only one primary attachment, and that the attachment figure acted as a secure base for exploring the world. The attachment relationship that this child developed, that would act as a prototype for all future social relationships. So disrupting it could have severe long-term consequences. So what Mary Ainsworth did was she found a way to actually study this attachment relationship by setting up a strange situation test. So in the strange situation, the child is put in a new situation, one that is totally unfamiliar but friendly. So typically the environment had like toys and, other items of interest around the room. And when the child was put in that strange situation, they were with their parent, their mother. After a few minutes, about 3 minutes, a stranger would enter the room, and the stranger would take some interest in the child, wanting to play with it. And Mary Ainsworth would observe how the child responded to the presence of the stranger, whether or not they kind of went back to the mother, or just ignored the stranger, got distressed by the stranger, interacted with the stranger, what they did. And so after about 3 minutes with a stranger in the room, the mother would get up and leave the room for 3 more minutes. Then what Mary Ainsworth was doing was monitoring how the child responded to the absence of the mother with this stranger in the room, one that they had only been familiar with for about 3 minutes before the mother left. After that, the mother would return, and Mary Ainsworth would be observing how the child interacted with the mother once the mother returned. The statistics that I have listed here, the 65%, 25%, and 10%, were from the statistics in the United States. This test was performed in other countries as well. And Mary Ainsworth found that 65% of the children were securely attached. And when a child was securely attached, and exposed to a stranger, the child or the infant toddler initially seeks closeness and contact with the mother. The mother is used as a safe base for which to explore, but may ultimately take interest in the stranger. When the mother leaves the room, the child becomes distressed, shows moderate distress, often crying at the separation, and then when the mother returns, the child is immediately happy to see the mother. That would be secure attachment. Now, 25% of the people that she studied were avoidant. This meant that in the presence of the stranger, the child did not seek closeness with or contact with their mother. They treated the mother like a stranger, and when the mother left the room, they rarely cried. When the mother returned, they barely noticed. The last 10% would have been anxious or ambivalent. So if we just look at that word ambivalent, right? Ambivalent would mean like ambidextrous, using both hands. So ambivalent, you have a strong pull in two opposing directions. So what this looks like in this situation is that the infant becomes very upset when the mother leaves the room, inconsolable often. And when the mother returns, the infant seeks that close contact, which there's that one side, and then angrily squirms to get away. And so there's the other side. They're happy that the mother returned, but they're angry that the mother left, and you see both things there. Now, I don't want you to think that that means that 35% of the mothers that were being tested were not doing a good job or weren't responsive to their kids, because there are other things that would affect how a child will respond in these environments, and temperament will be among them. There are some kids that are just inconsolable when their parents are not there. And then they're very happy to see their parent when the parent returns. And they'll spend some time after that kind of babysitting their parent and making sure their parent doesn't go anywhere. So there are temperament issues. It can't all be put on parenting. It's not all nurture. And these effects of attachment. So secure attachment does predict social competence. Children identified as securely attached between the ages of 12 and 18 months ended up being more outgoing. They were more confident, and when these children were restudied as 2 and 3-year-olds, they were found to be, again, more confident and were more persistent in solving challenging tasks. Duration of attachment is linked to negative outcomes. So babies who grow up in institutions without a caregiver's regular stimulation and attention do not form normal attachments and often appear to be withdrawn and frightened. Physical and emotional abuse will often disrupt attachment. And the good news is that a responsive environment helps most children recover from attachment disruption. Children who have been neglected early on and are then adopted by nourishing parents show virtually no adverse effects from the early neglect. And I know, like, a lot of people question daycare. Does daycare interrupt a child's ability to attach? And the answer to that is really no. As long as a child is in an environment where they are making attachments, they will be okay. Some children do become more attached to somebody that's not their parent, and that's okay. And I think a lot of times you might get upset, like, oh, that's my kid. Why do they prefer, say, their grandmother so much more or their daycare teacher so much more? But as long as they are developing attachments, we kind of have to put like our own sort of feelings aside to the best that we can in that way and just be like, all right, they're going to be okay. They're forming attachments, and that's what's necessary. There are other effects, though, to daycare, but the temperament and the home environment matter more than the daycare. Kids that are in daycare do show slightly advanced thinking and language skills at an earlier age, but they could be slightly more aggressive too because they're going to be in an environment where other kids might be modeling a little bit more aggressive behavior. And I think a big question is, are the parents parenting them, so to speak, at home? So if, you're working all day and you barely get to see your kid, and kids go to bed at a really early hour, mine probably not early enough, but at an early hour. And so if you're like, all right, so if I'm getting home at 6 and we have dinner and then my kid is in bed by 8, it's precious little time that I'm getting to spend with my child in that case. And so sometimes you want to avoid taking the conflict or taking on the hard issues or correcting behavior or essentially socializing your child because you might view it as being punitive. If you're not going to do that, that will affect their development more. So really, children who have a warm relationship with familiar, responsive caregivers, whoever they are, will reap the benefits of secure attachment. And lastly, we have Diana Baumann's parenting styles. So she has 4 different parenting styles. I think this chart here helps to break it down. And I have the one that's kind of bold and underlined, like I'm yelling it at you. I want you to see that as kind of the ideal parenting style. You really should know these. These have definitely shown up in free response questions on previous AP exams. So the authoritarian parent, this is a style of parent that's low in warmth. As you see, low in warmth, but high in need for control. So the communication is high from parent to child, but low from child to parent. So an authoritarian parent might say, like, don't interrupt, don't stay out late or you'll be grounded. And when the child's like, why? And it's like, because I said so. That would be an authoritarian parenting style. Think of that communication as being one direction, parent to child only. For permissive parenting, this is a style of parenting marked by submitting to the children's desires. So making few demands, using very little punishment. Parents tend to be high in warmth. They love their child, but the communication is very low from parent to child, but very high from child to parent. The expectations on the child's maturity is very low, whereas the authoritarian parent, the expectation of maturity is very high. But again, this is a one-way communication. This time it's child to parent. And I think as a kid, I thought, wow, it would be really great to have permissive parents, ones that just, if I want to buy something, they'd buy it for me. Or if I wanted to go somewhere, they would just simply let me do it, or where I wouldn't get punished for stuff. But the truth of it is that kids who grow up in permissive households don't tend to have the right skills when socializing with their peers. So they often have these like high demands. They don't understand why people are getting mad at them. And if I think in terms of raising my own kids, I'd like to give in to them. Obviously, it would be easier and they could see how much I love them. But part of loving them and raising them the right way is setting limits. It is telling them when they can't do stuff and when they can. It's not caving into everything, because if I'm raising my kids with a very permissive style and they go to a friend's house, very often that's the last time that family's going to want them over because of the way they'll behave at their friend's house. And who really wants that for their kids? The authoritative parenting, this is the ideal parenting. It's a style of parenting marked by making demands on the child, but being responsive, setting and enforcing rules, but discussing the reasons for the rules. where a child knows why something is in place. It's not that because I said so, it's because this is what could happen. Parents are high in warmth, and their version of discipline is moderate. It's focused really more on socializing, not so much on punishing. There's lots of talking and there's negotiations. There's an importance in giving people choices. If you're going down for breakfast, it feels good to have a choice. Like, the choice might be, do you want Eggo waffles or cereal? But that's still a choice. And in an authoritative parenting style, you might get to make some of these choices. Obviously, set limits on them, though. Communication will be high from parent to child, but it is also high from child to parent. So this is the only parenting style that's marked by two-way parenting. That's the authoritative. And lastly, we have the rejecting, neglecting parents, the parents that are uninvolved. And there's really no communication happening here. Parents here are disengaged, they expect very little of their kids, and they invest very little in their kids. Probably the saddest situation. Low in warmth, low in control, no communication. Now, correlational studies will show that the authoritative parents tend to have kids with the highest self-esteem, the greatest amount of self-reliance, and social competence.